Good evening, everyone, and welcome to our speaker series. I'm here to welcome our speakers and also our faculty members who are involved, our students. Spokane Community College has made it a commitment to equity and diversity work this year and for years to come, and we welcome this conversation. We also want to engage students, staff, faculty, community members at the college. My name is Guillermo and I'm the Director of Student Success, Equity, and Diversity at the college. And so further after this conversation, if there's questions or comments that come up, we'd love to follow up with a dialogue at the Center for Inclusion and Diversity at the college. So I'm just going to turn it over to Camelia, one of our faculty members, to do an introduction for our speaker tonight.
Thank you, Guillermo. On behalf of Spokane Community College and the Hagen Center for the Humanities, I would like to welcome all of you to our diversity dialogues. With the words, I see you, I hear you, I feel you. We welcome you collectively to sit down together, all of us at the same table at the same time, to engage in dialogue about race, about diversity, and about equity. We encourage audience participation. If you would like to ask questions of our guests this evening, please type them in the comments, or if you're not logged into social media, you can email your questions to scc.hagencenter@scc.spokane.edu. That's scc.hagencenter@scc.spokane.edu. Our moderators will forward those questions to us, and we will make sure we get to ask our guests as many of these questions as we're able. We would like to begin by acknowledging that we present this program from the traditional lands of the Spokane people, who have stewarded this land for generations. The presentation you're about to enjoy is part of Humanities Washington Speaker Bureau program. Humanities Washington is a nonprofit organization dedicated to sparking conversation and critical thinking, and it provides many other cultural programs to hundreds of thousands of people throughout Washington each year. Thanks to support from the National Endowment for the Humanities, the Washington Secretary of State, the Thomas S. Foley Institute for Public Policy and Public Service at Washington State University, and many private donors. Humanities Washington Speakers Bureau presenters visit all corners of the state. I would encourage you to visit their website at www.humanities.org to find other events like this one. A note on civil discourse. The Speakers Bureau program is designed to generate an open and honest conversation on many topics, some of which may be controversial. We encourage differing perspectives and viewpoints, but we also ask that you treat this topic, the speaker, and each other with respect. It's my pleasure to welcome Anu Taranath today to present her talk called Tangled: Why Your Hair Matters to Society. Anu Taranath is a professor at the University of Washington specializing in global literature, identity, race, and equity. She has received University of Washington's Distinguished Teaching Award, a Best of Seattle designation from Seattle Weekly, and multiple national Fulbright Awards and fellowships. She's the author of the book Beyond Guilt Trips: Mindful Travel in an Unequal World, as well as a consultant for schools, colleges, libraries, community organizations, and government agencies on social justice and global issues. Learn more about her work at www.anuturnath.com. She currently lives in Seattle. And please, again, help me welcome Dr. Taranath.
Thank you so much, Professor Nemri, and my appreciation to all of you for the kind invitation to join you this evening. 1 minute, please, while I get my slides up for you. Tangled, why your hair matters to society. Hair is simply a collection of protein filaments that sprout from our scalp. And yet hair actually carries great meaning for us, for our families, communities, and society as a whole. I'll start with a few stories from my own family's hair life that illustrate this. My parents came to this country in 1970 from India. Back home, my mother's hair was long, lustrous, and luxurious. And when she came to the United States, her hair, her long braid, was the thing that Americans commented on incessantly. Oh, your hair. Look at your braid. Do you braid your own hair? Do you wash your own hair? My mother's recollections of her early years in this country are so often about the ways people reacted to her hair and have really shaped the way that she understood herself in the first few years of being a new immigrant. My father had black hair without gray in his hair until his late 60s and early 70s. People around him were quite curious. Do you dye your hair? How come you have such black hair? You look so young. And although he hadn't done anything to deserve this praise, we in the family felt oddly proud and basked in his glory because of this feature of his hair. My first child was born without much hair. And for us, people from South Asia, this is pretty unusual. Most of our kids sprout copious amounts of hair right out of the womb, but not my daughter. In those first few days of her young life, my father would look at his grandchild sleeping and ask in jest, could this be true? Could this actually be our baby? Could one of our babies actually not have any hair? And finally, there's the question of my own hair. Let me show you here. I've got what is called a skunk streak. Skunk streak. All kinds of famous people that you see on this screen have a skunk streak. Mine is natural. I don't do anything. I don't dye my hair. I'm not sure about the people here on the screen with me. And my skunk streak invites people, all kinds of people who I don't know, to come and approach me about my hair. And I have heard comments for almost 15 years since I've had this skunk streak, all the way from, why don't you dye your hair? You have such a young face. You should dye your hair so you can look young. To the complete opposite extreme. And people come to me and say, we're so glad that you don't dye your hair. Because you have such a young face, you're able to have a little bit more heft and people can take you a bit more seriously because you've got some white in your hair. All of these are unsolicited comments. I don't ask people, please tell me about my hair, but people feel so compelled to come and tell me their impressions about what my hair signifies for them. This is on the bus. This is on the way to the bus. This is at the grocery store. This is all over the place, right? And all these examples show us how that when we look below the surface and trace the roots of our idea, our hair has come to mean much more than perhaps it should. And looking below the surface, going after the root of ideas is what so much of my career has been about. Professor Nimri gave me a little bit of an introduction. I'll just round it out a bit. As she said, I'm a UW faculty and teach a range of classes around storytelling and literature, around race, gender, identity, and difference. I teach about global literatures, so I'm often teaching about Africa, the Caribbean, South Asia. I teach a lot about immigration and migration here in the United States. I teach a lot about teaching as well and work with faculty and graduate students so we can deepen our impact in the classroom. This phrase, mindful travel in an unequal world, has been an important feature of my work over the last many decades. It is the subtitle of my book. The cover is there for you to take a look at, Beyond Guilt Trips, Mindful Travel in an Unequal World. I do quite a lot of work with study abroad and international education at the UW and at many other places. And I'm constantly thinking about what does it mean to be a well-intentioned person here at home or far away while we are traveling in an unequal world? How do we do that well? What are some of the complexities that come up? So that's what the book is about. I also do quite a lot with Humanities Washington. That's how I am with you this evening. This is my 4th season on the Speakers Bureau, and it's one of my most favorite things to do, to be able to travel to different parts of our state and engage with people that I might not meet except through this venue. So I'm so glad you're here tonight. Thank you. The last thing I do is quite a lot of racial equity work. I'm a consultant and work with the city, the county, small nonprofits, large corporations, private firms, and lots of educational institutions as well. And so much of my interest in identity and difference and how to create conversations about this brings me to the study of hair. As you will see in these images, hair and hairstyles are an incredible example of artistry, right? Here is a couple of ways that we have styled our hair over the ages. These are some styles from early Greek and Roman societies 2,000 years ago, as well as some medieval European styles. Here are some incredible styles that show the artistry from the continent of Africa as well as the African diaspora. Hair across the ages and cultures has meant very different things for different people, not only because of the type of hair that we have, but also because of the politics of power. Though a private asset, hair is often interpreted as a public symbol. So let's just think about this sentence for a moment, right? A private asset means something that belongs to us. And my hair, as well as your hair, is something that belongs to us. And yet, the hair that naturally sprouts from my head, it doesn't just belong to me because it is circulating in a wider world, in a wider context of meaning. And others are always watching and looking and making inferences, sometimes judging, right? We do that to others, others do that to us. And so though it is a private asset, our hair is often interpreted as a public symbol, right? Another way to think about this is through this art piece. This is a 1989 art piece by American artist Barbara Kruger. And in it, she has a collage that says, "Your body is a battleground." And she has created this piece in order to speak about a woman's right to choose and whether to proceed with a pregnancy or not. And though her art piece is around a woman's body and the way that a woman's body has often become a battleground, This is a wonderful image and a wonderful phrase for us to think about hair as well. If the body is a battleground, the hair has often been a battleground as well, as we will see this evening. Different cultures across the world have thought about hair in all kinds of ways. Here are some of the ways that we have thought about hair. Hair is sometimes seen as a life force, right? That it has some sort of strength or vitality and power. And when the hair is removed, it might signify surrender, right? Disheveled hair is often seen as a sign of grief or mourning. Bound hair, right, hair that is tightly bound, can be seen as a sign of discipline or about ownership. Loose hair, on the other hand, right, can often be understood as signaling freedom, sometimes insurrection or sexuality. People in different parts of the world have also used shaving the head to signify certain things. Sometimes it has to do with religion. Sometimes it has to do, especially short and shorn hair, required sometimes for prisoners, slaves, or soldiers, right? And braids, this is where we see the artistry. Braids have been used and interpreted in different cultures around the world for a range of things. We can often understand people's social status, right? Which ethnic group they are a part of is signified by what kind of braid they might use on their hair. Sometimes braids can also tell us about wealth, marital status, right? And it can be a sign of creativity and artistry as well. Tonight's presentation is looking at a critical look at hair, right? So we can better understand three ideas and how they connect together: beauty, bias, and belonging. I love these three words because they're so simple, and yet when you put them together, beauty, bias, and belonging, you start really thinking about how society works and how you and I are shaped by some of these larger forces. Hair is often about power. Hair can also be about race, gender, sexuality, religion, and class. When we're speaking about beauty norms, we're talking about a couple of things. We're talking about how that power is used to define, regulate, and sometimes punish if we don't follow the norms of a community, right? The norms that we see all around us. There are certain rules that sometimes are stated explicitly and sometimes are quite implicit, right? Once again, and these social rules can tell us a lot about race, gender, desirability, fitting in, belonging, so many different pieces and parts of our identity. And these are, in our society, conversations that many of us have not had too much practice speaking about. They're often seen as taboo. We're often uncomfortable. We're not quite sure how to navigate our own discomfort, talking about issues of race and power and society. And so much of my work is about trying to not ignore the elephant or buffalo or whatever animal is in the room, but really coming together to try to speak more honestly about some of the issues that are really critical for us as a society to think through together. This quote by Cornel West is one that I return to. A fully functional, multiracial society cannot be achieved without a sense of history and open, honest dialogue. I like that he pairs history with open, honest dialogue now, right? You can't pretend that what's happening now isn't influenced by the past. And in order to understand the past better, we will have to come together with some humility, with some curiosity and some openness in order to engage in this open and honest dialogue, right? An open and honest dialogue can help us dig into some really interesting issues. And these are the three themes that we'll talk about this evening. One, I will very quickly go through three historical moments where bias, hair bias against certain groups, right, has been, we can see that playing out in terms of the normative white beauty norms and the power. We will also look at a couple of examples when people have the wrong kind of hair in the wrong kind of place in their bodies. And I use wrong, of course, in quotes, right? For us to ask questions about what is the right place and what have we been taught to think of as the wrong place. We'll also look at some examples of art and resistance that artists and musicians have used to take back the conversation and push the conversation. So for this first section, I will very quickly just go through a few examples where we can see the way that hair has been used historically in order to sometimes terrorize and discipline people who are not white. So we start first with early Chinese immigrants and Chinese Americans. In the early to mid 19th century, the United States sees an increase in Chinese migration. This is, as you know, the gold rush time. It's a period of great racial anxiety, and the racial anxiety at that period is called the Yellow Peril, P-E-R-I-L, the Yellow Peril, with Chinese immigrants and Asians as a whole portrayed throughout the media and in print as sinister, emasculated, perpetually foreign, right? These are, of course, racist stereotypes, and you see them very heavily in this period. Amidst a plethora of laws that were targeting the Chinese, right? And here are some of those laws that were targeting the Chinese population. The Q Ordinance, you'll see that on the left-hand side toward the bottom, Q-U-E-U-E. The Q Ordinance of 1873 forced Chinese immigrants to cut their long braid. And many men in this era from a particular region of China, the style was to have a long braid in the back. And when the Yellow Peril, the racial anxieties around labor and race were playing out, these are some of the images that were circulating in popular culture, right? So just take a look here. What comes up for you as you see some of these images? How would you describe some of these images? If there are words that come up for you, please feel free to write them in the chat. It's hard to ignore the large scissors, right? That's right in front of us. The image on the top right, you can see a boot that is pressing down upon the hair, right? With the man crying in the foreground. Here, the image on the bottom left is written with the words, "The Chinese must go," right? And the image on the top left, right, you have a white man with an axe holding the cue, holding the braid of the Chinese man who's trying to run away, right? As many of you are saying, right, these are kind of creepy, racist, they're angry images, they're oppressive images, right? They land on us perhaps in a disquieting way. We're not quite so sure what to do with them, right? And this is one of the examples in the ways that hair has been used to discipline, to shame, to otherize, yeah? Another example in which hair becomes really important to think about, especially as we're thinking about beauty, bias, and belonging, is Native Americans and boarding schools. And the first Native American boarding school started in 1879. The last boarding school closed only in the early 1990s. Right?
Dr. Charanath,
Yes, please.
there is Courtney here says the images make them uncomfortable. They feel pain. They have long hair, and if someone did that to them, they would cry.
Yes, absolutely. And we might be tempted to think of this on an individual level, right? If Courtney feels that, I might feel that, right? Professor Nemri, you might feel that as well. And if this is happening to people in our group, in our particular ethnic group, as a form of racial terror, the fear, right, and discomfort and pain becomes so much more shared, right? Yes. Thanks everyone for your comments. As we think about Native American children and boarding schools, I'd like you to take a look at this image here. This is an image of one of the students in the Carlisle School, a man named Tom Torlino. And the images that you have here are very much images that you find in this period where you have a before and an after image. The before image of the native child is supposed to show savagery, an uncivilized demeanor. The after image, right, and presumably this is after the civilizing mission of Christian missionary work, is supposed to find a child that has decorum, that can move in white society better, right? So much of what was happening in some of the boarding schools, the cultural translation of a native child into a child that is more recognizable for the Christian missionaries. And the intent was to completely transform people from the inside out, to erase language, religion, family structure, the way that people made a living, the way that emotion was expressed, the way that people dressed. And the cutting of the hair, once again, is understood as a disciplining mechanism to tame the so-called savage at the time. And again, these are the racist stereotypes that were floating around at the time, right? That still float around now in different ways. But the cutting of the hair was a very symbolic move, right? It's supposed to complete the transformation. Here's some other images, before and after images. Many of these images were used as postcards and were sent all over the country as a way to advertise the civilizing work of the Christian Missionary Project. Again, I invite you to think a little bit about how these images land on you, right? When you see the before and after side by side, juxtaposed together, what comes up? What discomfort might come up? What feelings or memories might come up for you? And the third historical example is an example that's not just historical, it is quite contemporary as well. The artistry and subjugation of Black people's hair. You can do things with Black hair that are just incredible. Black hair, though, has also been so incredibly disciplined and has been so stigmatized over the centuries. This image that you have here on the left is a late 19th century image of people working on a plantation who, and the scarf that many of the women are wearing was actually something that was instituted by many of the slave holders and the slave holders' families who had imagined that Black hair is so unlike white hair that they didn't even want to see it. And so the scarf then became an important way to hide the hair from the gaze of the slave owner. The image that you have here on the right-hand side is for an advertisement for a hair straightening pomade. And even now, for many Black people, simply wearing hair in its own natural state can become a complex and politicized act. Whether you want it to be complex and politicized or not, it's because our private asset, right, the hair that naturally sprouts from our head, is interpreted as that public symbol. And that's why just the natural way of wearing a hair can be seen by others as being something political. What are ways to interrupt this story? What are ways that we can challenge the status quo? Right? That's a great question for us to be thinking about. And as we are thinking about how we might challenge the status quo, where the status quo comes from, it's good for us to think about the ways that we understand ourselves, often in relation to somebody else. Social in some ways, right? It keeps us in line. But on the other hand, it can discipline us out of thinking of critical questions. And we so often understand who we are and people like us against somebody who is not us, somebody who is unlike us. So people like us, people unlike us. As you are thinking about these ideas, we'll move into this second theme for this evening, what is often called a social blemish, when people have hair in a so-called wrong place. Here's an example of this. This is an advertisement for the shoe company Adidas from several years ago. And you have a model here, a European model by the name of Arvida Bystrom. And I'm not so sure if you can see this in the images here, but on Arvida's legs, she has a light dusting of hair on her legs. She's not shaved or waxed her legs for these images. And these images were considered quite risky, right, at the time. Risky because though she is such a stereotypical model in our sense of beauty norms, tall, thin, young, white, the fact that she has some hair on her legs for this image made this image for the advertising company a bit risky, a bit edgy. And the edginess was very much appreciated by some people for this ad, but it actually created such a furor that this model received so much hate, received rape and death threats for the very fact that she posed for these advertisements with hair on her legs. How dare she pose with hair on her legs and question our notion of femininity? Right? That was some of the people's ire and anger against this ad campaign. And people's anger around something can really tell you about what ideal is being upheld. If a young, thin, white model who has some hair on her legs creates that much fury, what kind of understanding of femininity do we have in our mind? What kind of gender norms do we have in our mind that have very little space for a woman who looks like this with a little hair on her legs, right? Our imaginations don't know what to do with that. And so we lash out, right? Here's another example of somebody who has hair that on a place that we might not expect it. This is Harnam Kaur. She's from Britain. And at the age of 12, Harnam had a medical condition that made her grow facial hair at the time. And as a child, having hair on your face might be a really complex, sometimes a traumatic thing in the middle of teenage years. And it was so for this young person. As Harnam grew, though, she started to realize that the more comfortable she was in her body and in her hair, the better of a life she would lead. And at some point, she started embracing her hair and started using it as a feature, a very important feature of her modeling career that you see here. Courtney's comment that I see here, you're absolutely right. We have normalized the fact that women are somehow hairless, right? And yet hair sprouts on all of our bodies. What does that mean, right? What does that mean that we've got these images that don't actually match the reality, you know? Another example of thinking about so-called wrong hair or in the wrong place is women and armpit hair. Once again, very naturally, hair sprouts from underneath our arms, as they do for men. And yet in different parts of the world, having and displaying armpit hair is somehow seen as very outside of the norms of femininity. In other places, though, having armpit hair is not seen as anything. It's not seen as a big deal at all, right? So our rules about this are not natural, they are cultural. They are very different rules in different places and different norms in different places, right?
Dr. Chernat,
Yes, please.
there's Corey here says in the chat,
Yes.
I wish it wasn't so socially normal to be so hostile to people like that. That sort of thing happens on the internet all the time.
Oh, isn't that the truth? In the anonymity of the internet, we can unleash it, can't we? Yeah, so much hate and vitriol on the internet. Absolutely. What a connective place for us. We're able to connect like this tonight because of this medium, but such a place of anonymized hate as well. You're right. Yeah. Another example that we can ask ourselves about is, what about men and baldness? If men don't have hair on their heads, is that the same as women not having hair on their heads if they shave their heads? Is shaved head the same as bald head? Or do these read different in our culture? Another example is women who cover their hairs, right? Because of custom or religion or choice. How do we feel about that? How does that look in different parts of the world? And so these are some of the questions that come up for us. I find these questions really exciting. Maybe you will too. Are all these instances the same phenomenon, or maybe somehow different? An unshaved head versus a shaved head. We can also add gender to that, right? A shaved woman's head, an unshaved but bald man's head, right? How do we read that? How about hair where we think it shouldn't be? Whether it's the chin of a woman, whether it's the hair of a leg, the hair on a leg of a woman, whether it's under the arm of a woman. Do you notice that it's often a woman's body that is being looked at quite differently than men's bodies are, right? Let's notice that. What about if there's less hair than expected, more hair than expected, or not showing hair by custom or choice? Lots to think about. Any discussion of hair has to include a question or a prompt about appropriation. This question is a good one for us to think about. Where does cultural inspiration end and cultural appropriation begin? Cultural inspiration, of course, is when we are able to appreciate something from another culture that is not ours and we borrow, right? Cultural appropriation is where we not just appreciate and borrow, but we take over. And it often has to do with power. Who has more power in society? What does it mean when non-Black women sport traditionally Black hairstyles? Is it okay if I do it? Is it okay if you do it? Is it okay if we are a celebrity? Here are some images of celebrities who have sported traditionally Black hairstyles. Is this cultural inspiration? Is this borrowing? Is this cultural appropriation? Thieving? What's the fine line between borrowing and thieving? Who's allowed to borrow what from whom? Let me say that question again. Who is allowed to borrow what from whom? We might extend that and say, and why? Right? Who's allowed to borrow what from whom and why? So if I, as a woman of color with Black and some white hair, if I suddenly dye my hair blonde, am I inspired? Am I appropriating? If somebody white sports dreadlocks, is that borrowing? Is that appropriating? Do you have anything to say? Any comments, thoughts that come up for you? Who's allowed to borrow what and when and why? On the one hand, right, if we didn't live in an unequal world, I would say borrow whatever you want from whoever you'd like. That's the benefits of a multicultural and global society. Let's borrow at will. Let's borrow freely. And yet, because we live in a very unequal world with beauty standards that are often coded as white, with hair type and hair texture and skin color that is closest to white having the most power and privilege in our society, because that is so much our norm, the fact that somebody white is enjoying dreadlocks becomes meaningful only because often somebody who's Black, whose hair is in dreadlocks, often gets censured for that very hairstyle.
Dr. Tanis, we have a question here from Corey. Your point is that those that have more social power can dictate the rules?
Those that have more social power often dictate the rules. Shouldn't be so, right? But those that often have more power dictate the rules, right? Yeah. This is a very sliding fine line, I think, between inspiration, cultural inspiration, and cultural appropriation, right? Once again, the white person with dreadlocks might be experimenting, might be expressing themselves in a particular way, might feel comfortable in that. I've heard from so many friends and colleagues that who are Black, if they are in dreadlocks, it is seen immediately in their workplace as unprofessional, as somehow not in keeping with the norms of workplace attire. So the double standards around who's able to do what and why plays out quite heavily in terms of this sliding line, right? This fine line between inspiration and appropriation. If professionally dressed, middle-aged white women wear traditionally Black hairstyles like cornrows, flat twists, finger waves, and twist outs, what responses might this raise? This was the question that an artist wanted to explore through her photography. Take a look at some of these images. This is Ndia Biel, photographer Ndia Biel. And what we have here, middle-aged, professionally dressed white women in traditionally Black hairstyles. I invite you to think about what comes up for you as you look at these images. Some of the descriptions that I've heard in the past when I show these images are, this feels odd. This feels cognitively dissonant. I'm not sure what I think I've heard. I've also heard, wow, they look wonderful. I've heard, oh, I wish my hair would do that. I've also heard from women of color in particular, interesting that white women can explore, but we as Black women in particular have much less space to explore. Again, because of the norms of professional culture that feel really hard to press up against. Yeah. So,
one person, oh, I'm sorry to interrupt. We have one person in the comments who says that they think these women look powerful.
Oh, great. Okay. Yeah, so keep digging into yourself, right? Learning about society is also really learning about our own responses to what we see, what we hear, how we're participating, right? The norms that we have been schooled in that sometimes are very explicit and sometimes are quite implicit, right?
Corey says they are much more artistic than normal hairstyles. It looks like a fashion show or a music video.
Oh, okay. Oh, great. Thanks.
And then we have another comment that says, I believe it can be very rewarding to celebrate and participate in other cultures as long as someone is not recreating those looks to be demeaning.
Yeah, great point. Okay. And again, because our private asset is being circulated in a public environment, and in a public environment that is so unequal, who's, again, I keep coming back to that statement, who's allowed to borrow what and when and why, right? It gets kind of complicated because it's not so easy. If you're really paying attention to society, and if you're really thinking about the impact of history and the current impact of harm and how that lands on us, it's not so easy. It would be much easier, of course, to say anybody can borrow and anyone can do anything, right? That seems like a very egalitarian thing to say. And yet, when you are paying attention a little bit to history, how it lands, how it moves through different communities, how different people feel, different people's experiences of beauty, bias, and belonging, then we have a much more complex picture to have to unpack, right? All the more important to talk together.
Dr. Chernath, there's Grace Hansen says, I like these hairstyles. They are cool.
Great, good, thanks. Let's take a look at some others. Here's another artist named Nakia Brown, who's also exploring hair and some of the visceral ways that we might respond. I'll give you a moment or two to soak in the images. Here's some more of her work. The left image is called If Nostalgia Were Colored Brown, and the right image is called The Refutation of Good Hair. And here's another image of hers, Kane Kalan on a fork. Over the last 10, 15 years, in order to create more body and hair positivity, what we see is a wide variety of books and music around hair, especially different kinds of hairs that traditionally have not been celebrated, that have actually been denigrated in society. Nappy Hair is a wonderful book for children that's nicely moving around society. The book on the right, Bad Hair Does Not Exist, Pelo Malo No Existe, is a bilingual book that is also exploring the heterogeneity and differences in Black and brown hair. This retelling of the Rapunzel tale is a beautifully illustrated book by Rachel Isadora and portrays Rapunzel as a girl of color with long, lustrous dreadlocks. Coloring books about hair are also quite popular. This is one of my favorites called I Love My Hair by Andrea Pippins. I have a couple of the images from the coloring book to show you. And this is a collage made from their Instagram page where you see many readers who are coloring the pages and uploading them and sharing them with a wider community. And the last thing I leave you with tonight is a song called I Am Not My Hair by singer India Ari. And here is the chorus of the song that you will hear in a minute. I am not my hair. I am not this skin. I am not your expectations. No, I am not my hair. I am not this skin. I am the soul that lives within. Let's take a listen. I'll play for you half the song and then I'll shut the slides off and then we can have some conversation and some Q&A together. Sorry to interrupt such a great song. I recommend that you see the whole video. It's a great video. Before I stop the slide share, I'd like you to have my contact info. If you'd like to get a hold of me, here is my website, anutaranath.com. You're also welcome to follow me on Instagram if you want to know about some of my public events. So India Ari here, right, in this song says, I am not my hair. I'm not my skin. I'm the soul that lives within. And there's a part of me that says, yes, you are absolutely right. Nobody is their hair. Nobody is their skin. It is all what's underneath that counts. And the other half of me says, yes, that is such an aspirational idea. That in a context in which our private asset of hair and skin and body is always being judged, is always being appraised in a social context, we are oftentimes our skin. We are oftentimes our hair. We are oftentimes our bodies. It shouldn't be like that, and it often is. So I feel really vexed about this song. I love it. And it also makes me stretch and think about so much of what we've been talking about this evening. Thank you, everyone. I'm happy to take some questions or hear some of your comments, please.
Thank you, Dr. Taranath. I know in my culture, in the Arab culture, hair is very important. And they call it the crown of the woman is her hair. However, I think those times, I mean, in the past used to be important, and their views of hair, how the hair looks like, is really important in society. So I could relate to your presentation. I really enjoyed it, and I just want to thank you very much for joining us this evening.
Thank you. Thank you.
So Dr. Trans, we got no audience questions yet, but hello everybody. I'm the social media manager for Community Colleges of Spokane, and I wanted to revisit something. You had a slide on nostalgia and how it kind of made me think that, yeah, a lot of nostalgic images, they're very white, they're very 50s and kind of white, and I wanted to see if you could just expound on that a bit more about why specifically that era, the 50s, the 60s, even the 70s, it's so dominated, and it's such a small part of the overall American culture.
I wonder if it's the imagery from those times that feel iconic for us, right? You know, our media is changing so dramatically. You in your position know this now. Last 10 years, so much change, but something about, I think, the 60s, the 70s, those images, they have a particular place in the culture. I'm wondering if maybe that's part of it, no?
Yeah, I totally agree. And I was wondering if you could talk a bit more about yourself too, about how specifically hair caught your attention as something to research and talk about.
The comments that I receive around my hair have always surprised me. Again, they're very unwarranted. I don't ask people, hi there, fellow person on the bus with me, please tell me about my hair. What do you think? But the ease with which so many people have shared their like or dislike with me, as if that's fine, made me really curious about what people see in one another. And the more I started thinking about this, the more questions came up. Because of course, hair isn't just about what's here. Once you start asking about hair and gender and body and our imagery of this, all kinds of things open up for us, right?
Right, it's interesting you said that too. You live in Seattle, correct?
I do.
I'm from Seattle, and Seattle's kind of famous for the Seattle freeze, quote unquote, where people they don't try to talk to a lot of strangers very often. So I'd be curious if you lived in a city like New York, how much more you'd be seeing that type of interaction and how that could get it'd be very tiresome very quickly.
Even with Seattle Freeze, I can't tell you how many people have come and talked to me about hair.
Right.
Right.
Oh, that's great. Well, I'm not seeing any more questions at all. So last chance here. If anybody has anything last minute they'd like to ask Dr. Taraneth, and we put her Instagram in the comments and a link to her website as well. So if you want to interact with her more, you can certainly do that there. So
Sure. Beauty, bias, and belonging, right? These are some great words for us to think about in our own life and in our communities.
So we've got one question here. This is from Courtney. What are some things you have heard about Indian hair? A lot of focus on hair in the US is of African descent. So I would love to know what kind of prejudice we have on Eastern countries.
Well, I was just reading recently that a lot of the hair that is used for Black women's extensions is actually the hair that comes from India. It's from Indian women's hair. And so something about the texture of Indian women's hair is as seen by a lot of beauticians as working really well as hair for extensions. So that's a very curious thing for us. And I think, like Professor Nemri said, you know, hair for lots of cultures and for women in particular is seen as this crowning glory, right? The rules for men look really different than the rules and expectations for women. How we style our hair, what it looks like, how it should look. This, of course, is changing in lots of urban places because of work environments and more relaxed rules about gender codes and all. But I think traditionally, women's hair has been looked at so differently than men's. Actually, women's everything is looked at so differently than men's often. Right?
So I see in the chat here from, is it Nancy? I really enjoyed this meeting. Thank you.
Wonderful.
And another one from Brandon. Really enjoyed watching this. Thank you. And we all thank you.
Great, glad. Thank you, everyone. Nice to be here this evening.
Thank you so much. And you have a good evening, everyone.